By December 1944, the Western Front had grown deceptively quiet. Snow padded the Belgian forests, muffling engines and footsteps alike. The Allied High Command, confident that Hitler's forces were crumbling, eased into logistical planning for the final push toward the Rhine. Yet beneath those placid drifts lay the seeds of chaos, the last great German gamble of the war. Omar N. Bradley, commander of the U.S. 12th Army Group, spent the first week of December in endless meetings and field visits. To his calm Midwestern manner, winter meant consolidation. Fortify positions, secure supply lines, rotate tired divisions, and expect nothing more dramatic than frostbite reports. The Allies had rationed fuel and winter clothing carefully. With Eisenhower's approval, Patton's Third Army had even lent some tanks to maintenance depots further south. The European war seemed to be settling into an administrative rhythm. Then there was Patton George S. Patton, Jr., the old blood and guts who despised stagnation as much as a field mouse hates snow. His Third Army, hugging southeastern Belgium and Luxembourg, had clawed eastward through Lorraine months before. The men were veterans of Metz and Nancy, exhausted yet itching to prove themselves again. Patton's reconnaissance units kept probing along the Luxembourg border, reporting German murmurs beyond the Siegfried Line. Official orders told him to rest and refit. His instincts told him otherwise. In his warmer moments, Bradley affectionately called Patton a magnificent pain in the neck. Both men respected each other deeply, but their chemistry resembled flint and steel. Useful friction, always sparking. Bradley embodied patience and coordination as Eisenhower's grounded strategist. Patton embodied willpower, incarnate Eisenhower's lightning bolt. Keeping both men aimed in the right direction required diplomacy worthy of the United Nations and nerve worthy of a tank commander. Meanwhile, in the thick forests of the Ardennes, Hitler prepared a gamble bordering on fantasy. Operation Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, was his bid to split the Allied front, recapture Antwerp, and negotiate peace on his own terms. The German buildup had been astonishingly covert. Columns of troops moving by night, camouflage nets over tanks, radio silence maintained with maniacal discipline. Allied air reconnaissance, grounded by weeks of fog and heavy snow, saw little more than blank whiteness. Thus the stage was set. Bradley's sector, largely held by the U.S. First Army under Courtney Hodges, appeared tranquil. The thinly spread divisions there were inexperienced engineers, artillery, and newly arrived infantry regiments enjoying what headquarters called a quiet front. Further south, Patton's Third Army was replenishing in the Luxembourg area, theoretically on stand-down. He had, however, ordered his intelligence staff to dream in German, which loosely translated to expect trouble. Even his chaplain sensed it, scheduling impromptu services for Christmas as though time were running out. By mid-December, Allied newspapers carried cheerful headlines about home for Christmas expectations. In one of Patton's war diaries, he scribbled between profanities that complacency was the most dangerous condition known to man, worse than stupidity, for it can infect the clever. His staff knew the pattern. Boredom made him restless. Restlessness led to ideas. And ideas led to yet another unofficial maneuver that would thump against Bradley's rulebook like a cannonball through tissue paper. Still, the rigid command structure of the Western Front had its logic. Eisenhower was supreme commander. Beneath him, Bradley coordinated the 1st, 9th, and 3rd U.S. Armies as the 12th Army Group. Montgomery commanded the 21st Army Group in the north. Devers ran the 6th Army Group further south. Each had national boundaries, logistical zones, and crucially supplied pipelines that could not be tangled casually. The front ran roughly north-south, and the dividing line between Bradley's and Devers's areas, as well as between American and British sectors, was not an artistic suggestion. It was a lifeline. Patton measured lifelines differently. To him, every road was a potential tank route. Every border, a negotiable rumor. The Third Army's intelligence estimated something ominous, a swelling of German radio traffic east of Luxembourg, and strange road movements near the Eifel. His operations officer, the diligent and long-suffering General Gaffey, drafted contingency plans for a northern wheelper, perhaps a 90-degree pivot to hit any enemy attack in the flank. Gaffey filed the plan semi-formally, marking it for study only. Patton quietly memorized it. Bradley, meanwhile, remained convinced the Germans were incapable of major offensives. They were fighting in Norway, the Balkans, Hungary drained and retreating everywhere. Besides, the Ardennes terrain was miserable for tanks. Narrow roads, rolling woods, dense with snow and mist. What commander besides Patton would picket for decisive battle? At dawn on December 16, 1944, the tranquil map exploded. Along a 60-mile front from Monschau southward, German artillery roared. Panzer columns smashed into thin American lines. Communications collapsed. The Battle of the Bulge had begun. Bradley first heard of it while shaving in Luxembourg City. He initially thought the reports exaggerated. Within hours, it became clear the enemy's thrust was vast and coordinated. Headquarters buzzed like a hornet's nest. Hodges's First Army reeled back, divisions melting in the white chaos. Bastogne, a road hub, became central almost by accident. Not that, if untied, would let German armor spill west toward the Meuse River. Patton was already smiling, that sharp, predatory smile that meant he smelled opportunity. Meetings with weather-beaten staff officers turned kinetic. In Verdun, on December 19th, Eisenhower held a conference with his senior commanders Bradley, Patton, and Bedell Smith among them. There, Patton stunned everyone by announcing that his Third Army could pivot north within 48 hours to relieve Bastogne. Bradley blinked. The fuel alone, the road clearances, the coordination sounded impossible. Yet Patton had already anticipated it. 3 separate contingency plans for 3 different pivot directions were sitting in his briefcase, waiting for one word of approval. Eisenhower gave the order. Bradley nodded with cautious pride. But one logistical detail complicated matters. To strike north toward Bastogne, Patton would need to swing part of his army through another command's zone crossing borders, not just geographic, but bureaucratic. The 12th Army Group's internal seams were suddenly irrelevant in the face of catastrophe. Yet to Bradley, command, discipline, and Allied unity were sacred. An American division appearing unannounced in a British supply sector could cause chaos and political headaches in London and Washington alike. Patton listened to those cautions once, then issued his movement orders anyway. Convoys snarled along icy roads, engineers worked by flashlight to widen bridges, tanks rumbled through snowfall like prehistoric beasts. To the soldiers, it was a miracle of logistics. To Bradley, it was the opening note of a symphony that had better end in victory or scandal. While Patton's forces churned north, Bradley monitored the developing bulge on the map, its bow pushing toward Bastogne and eventually toward the Meuse. He respected Patton's audacity, but dreaded its consequences if coordination failed. Allied warfare in late 1944 had become almost corporate in its interlocking complexities. Fuel ledgers, liaison officers, radio ciphers. Patton's instinctual moves sliced through those webs, thrilling at the operational speed, terrifying the administrators retroactively cleaning up after him. Bradley's aides began hearing him mutter about that wild horseman again, though within the same breath he'd admit, "But God help me, he might be exactly what we need." By Christmas Eve, frost-rimed trucks carried precious fuel and ammunition into the southern Belgian hills. Columns marched through villages lit only by chimney glow. Patton's divisions, including the 4th Armored, were pushing relentlessly toward Baston's relief. From the air, when the weather briefly cleared, reconnaissance officers marveled at the sight. Serpentine trails of armor weaving north like molten iron through snow. Somewhere in his camouflaged headquarters, Bradley looked over those reports and sighed, the pragmatist staring at the artist of war gone rogue. The line had been crossed, literally and figuratively, and now the outcome would justify or condemn it. He poured himself coffee gone cold, muttering something the staff would later remember as half admiration. Half reproach, "Patton's ignoring my maps again. He'd better make it worth it." Snow fell sideways the night Patton's armored columns broke through the administrative frontier of the 12th Army Group. To the map clerks at headquarters, the red arrows streaked beyond the approved boundary tank regiments, plunging into an area technically under Montgomery's oversight to the north and Devers' logistical umbrella to the south. To Patton, those invisible lines meant nothing next to a besieged American garrison crying out in Bastogne. Omar Bradley was not a man who shouted. When news arrived that Patton's lead elements had disregarded coordination channels, one colonel expected fireworks. Instead, Bradley removed his glasses, rubbed his temples, and murmured, "He's done it again." Then louder, "Get me George on the wire." Disjointed radio signals crackled through the blizzard until Patton's command truck caught the call. Bradley's voice was steady but edged. "George, I'm seeing your divisions halfway up Montgomery's corridor. You were ordered to flank the bulge, not redraw the map." Patton, sounding exultant, replied, "Omar, we're closing on Bastogne. The men are moving faster than we can count. You can scold me when I get there." Bradley's next sentence would become legend among the staffers who overheard it. "You re-risking the alliance, George? If Ike thinks you've trampled Monty's boundary again, he'll have kittens big enough to pull chariots." Patton laughed, a rolling, delighted sound that seemed to heat the frozen cabin. "Let him have M. I'll bring him a rescued garrison for Christmas." He clicked off. Bradley was left staring at the silent receiver. His strategist's mind weighed two sets of disasters, one bureaucratic, the other military. Official channels demanded patience coordination through SHAEF's Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, negotiations for line adjustments, careful scheduling of supply depots. The battlefront demanded something simpler: speed. Eisenhower, pragmatic as ever, soon learned of Patton's excursion. Far from erupting, he smiled wryly. "George's tanks get there first," Ike said. "We'll move the boundary to meet them." That was the alchemy of Allied command, the ability to transmute insubordination into initiative after the fact. But Bradley's concern was not vanity. The post-D-Day alliance functioned on fragile Anglo-American trust. The British still remembered Patton's earlier gaffes about our cousins and post-war matters. If his Third Army seemed to hijack territory under British responsibility, political aftershocks could rumble from Whitehall to Washington. Bradley, ever the diplomat, knew victories could be lost in conference rooms. Yet he could not deny the heroism unfolding. Barely 48 hours after that heated exchange, contact reports emerged. Lead scouts of the 4th Armored Division breaking through German lines south of Bastogne. The relief column pushed north despite sleet, mines, and constant shelling. When the first Sherman tank rolled into the town on December 26th, General McAuliffe's garrison famously defiant with his nuts. Reply to the German surrender, demand erupted in exhausted cheers. Patton, arriving moments later, sent a brief message to Bradley. Bastogne relieved. Merry Christmas. Bradley read it and allowed himself the smallest grin. Merry Christmas, you lunatic. Winning a battle is one thing. Explaining how you won it, another. In the weeks that followed, as January 1945's thaw began to reclaim the snow, Allied officers compiled after-action reports. They recorded tonnages of fuel consumed, bridges built, and casualties sustained. Hidden between those columns lurked a quieter line item. Boundary violations retrospectively. Bradley's commentary during the review boards was characteristically modest. Publicly, he praised Patton's speed and determination. Privately, he reminded his staff that the rule of law must someday reassert itself over the rule of genius. Yet he admitted that Patton's gamble shortened the siege and possibly the entire battle. The quick pivot of Third Army had ripped apart the southern hinge of Hitler's offensive, preventing the Germans from severing Allied logistics. Eisenhower later wrote that the episode symbolized the balance between discipline and daring that ultimately defined Allied success. The command system had been strong enough to tolerate mavericks, but wise enough not to smother them. Bradley took satisfaction in that equilibrium. Still, those who knew him recalled one rare evening when he allowed himself to brood aloud. If every general fought like George, we'd win faster, but lose control. If none fought like him, maybe we'd never win at all. January dragged on with grinding counterattacks, yet the tide had turned. German troops retreated through burned villages, their watch on the Rhine reduced to ashes. The Allies closed the bulge, straightening the front by early February. Reporters near Bastogne saw Patton's men joking about how their route had erased every line on Bradley's map. One soldier said, "We didn't cross borders, we just took shortcuts to history." Bradley chuckled when he read that dispatch, though he later annotated the clipping with a note. Shortcuts are dangerous privileges of those who can finish the job. That sentence distilled his philosophy. Courage was admirable, but self-control completed it. Still, when recollections of the Ardennes surfaced after the war, even Bradley's writing carried undertones of respect that outshone annoyance. Patton's audacity, he confessed in A Soldier's Story, sometimes endangered coalition harmony. But it also saved lives at Bastogne and preserved our momentum. Indeed, the Third Army's relief operation has since become a textbook example of operational genius. 48 hours of slashing movement through blizzard conditions directed by a commander who would not wait for permission when necessity itself had given it. Military academies still debate whether Patton's disregard for boundaries represented recklessness or prophetic clarity. The official answer tends toward moderation, the unofficial toward admiration. On the first mild day of spring 1945, Bradley and Patton inspected troops in Germany. The snow was gone, replaced by mud and wildflowers struggling through ruined fields. Between reviews, Bradley teased, "Still know where your borders are, George?" Patton tipped his helmet back and grinned. "Sure, wherever the enemy stops firing." They both laughed. The quarrel long buried under shared memory of hardship. In that brief exchange, historians glimpsed the paradox that won the war. Strategy demanded lines. Victory demanded men willing to cross them. The Ardennes offensive ended as both a disaster for Germany and a moral test for the Allies. Bradley represented disciplined cooperation. Patton embodied inspired defiance. Together, they proved that success in coalition warfare must balance obedience with initiative, respect with audacity. Every time the snow returns to the Ardennes, the forest seems to whisper echoes of engines and arguments. Somewhere in that ghostly sound lives Bradley's stern admonition, "You re-risking the alliance." And Patton's unapologetic echo, "Worth the risk." Between those two sentences, the modern art of coalition command was born.